محمد عليه أفضل الصلاة وتم التسليم. Welcome to the third lecture in this course, Applied Linguistics, with me, Dr. Ahmad السقوفي. In the introductory and first and second lecture, we talked about a number of issues regarding applied linguistics and the scope, the definition of applied linguistics. Today we'll be looking at a very important issue with regards to applied linguistics. It's the issue of the native speaker. You may have heard about people, in the past, or read in the books published in 70s, 60s, until 80s, even 90s, late 90s, talking about the native speaker, and they wanted the language learner, the student who is learning the language, to be native-like, or to because this is the criteria. In this lecture, we will talk about this issue, and we will consider it, and we will see if this is correct or not. So before we start off our presentation today, I would like to define what it means to be a native speaker in a certain language. So we've got three factors here that have to be actually mentioned in order for us to be able to understand this concept, which is the native speaker. Firstly, there is the question of personal history. You have got to know who is this native speaker. So in this regard, native speakers are considered to be people who acquired the language naturally and effortlessly in childhood. So these people who actually acquired the language, they did not actually put that much effort into learning it when they were children. So they spoke the language as a result of the huge input that they have been receiving when they were babies until they have grown into children. So this definition, or this description of the first point here about the personal history, it is saying people who acquired, not learned. So we have got to differentiate between learning and acquisition. Learning is a conscious process. You come to class, you want to learn a language, and then you are taught that language. Acquisition is, on the other hand, unconscious, effortless, as they said here, and it is happening all the time. Whereas in learning, you've got to come to my class from 9:30 to 11:15, from 11:15 to 1 o'clock or whatever. There is a specific time for learning, but for acquisition, it happens all the time. You don't have a specific time, and you cannot actually remember when it happened. That's why it is a very long journey in our lives, actually. So this is the first factor that we have to consider, that there is a personal history, that children have learned the language in their childhood naturally, so with no actually direct or intentional instruction or formal instruction. You don't sit in a chair and then your father comes to you and say, okay, have a seat. I'll teach you today what this thing means. This is a bread. okay, eat it. No, you don't say like this. So it is happening naturally and effortlessly in childhood. Secondly, there is a question of expertise. Expertise here is a very important word. Native speakers are seen as people who use the language or a variety of it correctly and have insight into what is or is not acceptable. So native speakers, as this definition suggests, they can tell you what is acceptable and what is not, what is correct, what is not. So this is how we in fact define the native speaker. These are the people who know how to say things in their language. Are they actually accepted in this context or not? So they will be able to tell you about all of these issues. Thirdly, there is a question of knowledge and loyalty. Being a native speaker, it is assumed, entails knowledge of and loyalty to a community which uses the language. So you are loyal to these people. You are loyal to this particular group in your community. Once you are a native speaker, you belong to these, to this group, and you, in fact, it entails knowledge of that community, which is using the language. You know your people. You know how they use the language. You know what is acceptable in this community and what is not. So, this is the third and last factor about the native speaker. This is the definition, if I can say, if I may say, of the native speaker. The native speaker is defined from these three perspectives, or from these three factors. We have to look at the personal history, we have to look at expertise, we have to look at knowledge and loyalty. These are three important factors we have got to consider when defining what we mean by a native speaker, or what it means to be a native speaker in your own community. However, there are some aspects of language proficiency that this traditional definition of the native speaker does not include. This definition, these three factors that I have just mentioned, are not enough. They do not capture the whole picture. There is something missing there. What is it that they do not include? Firstly, it says nothing about proficiency in writing, but only proficiency in speech. So, as a native speaker, according to the definition that we have actually stated at the beginning here of this presentation, that you are proficient in speaking only. It does not say anything about writing. It says about your personal history. So when you were a child, did you write? You wrote, but not that much. It was about drawing, about something, very little. You did not do that much effort in it. So it's not about proficiency in writing. So hence, it's not about proficiency of in writing, but it's about proficiency in speech only. The second issue is that the native speaker's knowledge of the language is implicit rather than explicit. Implicit means that it is not seen. Explicit, I can see it. It is clear, I can see it. So it is here, according to this definition, that the native speaker's knowledge is implicit, which means that using the rules correctly without being able to explain them. Native speakers, in fact, they can, as we said here about expertise, they can tell you, well, this is correct, this is not correct, this is acceptable, this is not so. Well, I don't know why. I'm using, for example, the Queen shall arrive, the Queen will arrive, but most native speakers won't be able to tell you the difference between shall and will, or despite the fact that they use them correctly, but they don't know why. They don't know the role. So this is called implicit. Their knowledge is implicit. They have acquired this through their, childhood or adulthood or whatever, but they don't know the rule. And they don't know the difference between these models, shall and will, for example. Lastly, traditional native speakerness implies nothing about size of vocabulary, range of style, or ability to communicate across diverse communities. So does it say that, for example, in order to be a native speaker, you've got to learn 5,000 words, 6,000 words, 7,000 words? No, it does not say something, or it does not say, anything about the size of the vocabulary, range of style, ability to communicate across diverse communities. So it's, this definition is not clear about these issues. Therefore, it is not comprehensive. It is not including these factors that we have just mentioned, or that we have mentioned already in our, presentation, which really makes us, aware of the fact that maybe non-native speakers are better than native speakers in terms of, for example, vocabulary. You can be a native speaker, a second language learner, but you can learn more vocabulary than the native speaker of that language that you are learning. So it does not say this, and it is perhaps, for most of the time, non-native speakers can actually exceed the native speaker's knowledge in that regard. We have got another issue which is related to the English language. It is English as a lingua franca, ELF. It is a new thing that happened actually to the language because of immigration and because of colonization, because of wars and stuff like that. So, and people who started actually to find jobs there for business and for communication with the people who are speaking English as a first language. Speaking English as a lingua franca means speaking a new variety of English which depends neither on childhood acquisition nor on cultural identity, and is often used in communication in which no native speaker is involved. So it is a new kind of language. It is English, but it is a new structure of English, or you invent a new vocabulary in English, in which you have not actually, or that you have not, in fact, acquired through your childhood, or you have acquired from your cultural, nor in cultural identity. But it is used in communication between non-native speakers. For example, they say, she go. You are busy today, isn't you? Or isn't it? Sorry. You are busy today. You're very busy today, isn't it? So instead of saying, aren't you, they say, isn't it? Which is a new variety of English. This is English as a lingua franca. Native speakers do not say this in their communication with each other or with non-native speakers. This is a kind of language which is widely used among non-native speakers in those countries, I mean. So they speak English, but they have a new variety of English. The spread, actually, why this is so? The spread of English has generated intense interest in the study of language pedagogy and of second language acquisition, SLA. Historically, the most active of applied linguistic inquiry has been in these areas. So, the spread of English has had a wide impact on the people from different countries, I mean around the world. They were interested in it. They have actually developed this interest because now, as we said, the language of research, you remember we talked about the growth of English, the language of science, the language of business now, when you want to do business, is in English. If you want to be accepted in certain jobs, you've got to know English, even here in our country, in Saudi Arabia. So the interest in the study of language pedagogy and of second language acquisition has actually started to be receiving much attention in that era when English started to spread around the world. Indeed, in the early days of the discipline, which is applied linguistics, and the study of teaching English as a foreign language, TEFL, were considered to be one and the same. Now, actually, we will look back at the development of TEFL over the last 100 years or so. So here, in our lecture today, we'll be looking about issues regarding applied linguistics. And we will look firstly at the grammar translation method, which is grammar translation language teaching, or they say grammar translation method. This is a method of teaching, or this was a method of teaching, which was common in the school rooms of Europe in the 20th century. The teaching of modern foreign languages, English, French, let's say German or Russian, whatever language was there, was influenced by the dead classical languages, Latin and ancient Greek. So the way the modern languages were taught was influenced by the by the dead classical languages like Latin and ancient Greek. How was modern language learning at that time? How was it? Modern language learning was assumed brought students into contact with great national civilizations and their literature. So in order to learn a language, you've got to know the literature here. You are taught the language through literature and through the national civilizations of that, country or of that culture. Also here, another important issue in this method, grammar rules were explained to the students in their own language. Vocabulary lists were learned with translation equivalents. So the teacher who was teaching the students at the time, for example, English, but they are from their mother tongue was Arabic, he or she was allowed to speak Arabic in class in order to explain to the students the grammar rules of English through Arabic. Vocabulary lists also were translated. Everything was translated to the mother tongue of those learners. So the way into the new language was always through the students' own first language. In order for those students to learn English, I've got to teach them Arabic, which means that I have to know it as an English teacher. Or as a teacher of English, I've got to know Arabic because I need to actually teach these students in their own language. Success was measured also in terms of the accurate use of grammar and vocabulary other than effective communication. So if they get the inflections right, for example, they say subject-verb agreement, he goes, she goes, it goes, whatever. They say, okay, yes, this is right, this is correct. This is language learning. Vocabulary. What do we mean by it? What is a TV? Say television, for example. What is a door? Bab. This was learning, according to them. So if the students were able to identify or to tell us the meaning of that, the equivalent translation of that language, of that word, they are learning the language. If they can successfully tell us about the correct subject-verb agreement, they get it right, that would be considered language learning, rather than effective communication. So there was no communication. If there was any, actually, it was very little. Using the language meant written translation. It was not used in oral communication. Language was only used in order to translate things into the target language of the learners. Also, there was no emphasis on the development of fluent speech because the students were given very limited time to, do such activities. So they were not allowed to speak in the class as they were actually busy with activities, doing the grammar activities and translation at the same time. This is actually what this lecture actually is about, and this is what we wanted to cover in this point, in this stage of the course. The grammar translation method have actually received fierce comments and criticism regarding its way of teaching and its focus on rules of grammar and teaching of vocabulary through translation and using the students' first language in the in teaching the target language. This has in fact led to this has led other people to find another teaching method which should actually take into account the shortcomings of the grammar translation method and come up with a new method which should be better in terms of learning and teaching, because our focus is on the learner. His learning is our ultimate aim. to produce the language. Let him or let her speak and write fluently, read also, listen, to listen with comprehension, read with comprehension. So this is the topic, this is going to be the focus of our next lecture, and I'll see you inshallah on the fourth lecture. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.